The polished elevator glided upwards, carrying Daniel Foster towards another day of simmering frustration. At 45, he was well acquainted with challenging superiors, but Victoria Shaw was in a category all her own. As the doors parted to reveal the bustling 37th floor of Apex Innovations, Daniel inhaled deeply, bracing himself for whatever curveball his 32-year-old boss might hurl at him today. "Foster!" The sharp voice sliced through the office ambiance. "My office now." Daniel stifled a sigh, his muscles tensing as he walked towards Victoria's corner office. Through the transparent walls, he observed her pacing, her tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the minimalist white decor she mandated for the entire floor. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, emphasizing her sharp features and perpetually furrowed brow. As he entered, Victoria didn't bother to look up from her tablet. "The Goldstein account. What's our status?" "I emailed you the latest projections last night as requested," Daniel replied, striving to maintain a neutral tone. "They should be in your inbox." Victoria's head jerked up, her blue eyes flashing. "And you didn't think to follow up this morning? What if I overlooked it? What if the client called for updates?" Daniel resisted the urge to retort. He had, in fact, sent a follow-up email at 7 a.m., fully aware that Victoria rarely checked her messages before 9. "My apologies," he said instead. "I'll be sure to verbally confirm receipt in the future." "See that you do," Victoria snapped. She returned her attention to her tablet, effectively dismissing him. As Daniel turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and don't forget the company event tonight. Try to look presentable for once." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Daniel to retreat to his cubicle, his jaw clenched in silent frustration. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, him and Emily on their wedding day, both radiating happiness. Emily, with her warm hazel eyes and gentle smile, was his anchor in the tumultuous seas of corporate life. As he settled into work, his phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Can't wait for tonight. So proud of you, sweetheart. Love you." Daniel smiled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Tonight's gathering was to celebrate Apex's latest round of funding, cementing their position as one of the fastest-growing tech startups in the city. Despite Victoria's constant criticism, Daniel knew his work had played a crucial role in attracting investors. And more importantly, Emily would be there by his side, reminding him of what truly mattered. The day dragged on in a flurry of meetings, reports, and thinly veiled jabs from Victoria. By the time 6 p.m. arrived, Daniel was more than ready to loosen his tie and enjoy an evening with his wife. He met Emily in the lobby, his breath catching as he saw her step out of a rideshare. At 43, Emily was as beautiful as the day they met. Her curvy figure was flattered by a flowing sapphire dress, her salt and pepper hair styled in elegant waves. As she approached, her face brightened with a smile that never failed to make Daniel's heart race. "You look stunning," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Emily squeezed his hand. "So do you, handsome. Ready to show me off?" Daniel chuckled, guiding her towards the elevators. "Always." As they ascended to the penthouse level, where the party was being held, Daniel felt a mix of pride and unease. He was proud of his accomplishments at Apex, proud to have Emily by his side, but he couldn't shake the nagging concern about how Victoria might behave. He'd seen her at company functions before, how the alcohol seemed to amplify her worst traits. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene of corporate celebration in full swing. The spacious penthouse buzzed with executive chatter, clinking champagne flutes, and the soft melodies of a jazz quartet in the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, now twinkling with early evening lights. Daniel guided Emily through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues and introducing her to those she hadn't met before. He was just beginning to relax when he heard a familiar voice behind him, slightly louder than necessary. "Well, well, Foster, you actually managed to arrive on time for once." Daniel turned to see Victoria, a flute of champagne in her hand and a sardonic smile on her face. Her eyes flicked dismissively over Emily before returning to Daniel. "Victoria," Daniel nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Emily. Emily, this is my supervisor, Victoria Shaw." Emily extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's wonderful to meet you, Victoria. I've heard so much about you." Victoria's eyebrows arched as she shook Emily's hand, her gaze now lingering on the older woman's face. The corners of her mouth twitched, and Daniel felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "How charming," Victoria said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. She turned to Daniel, her eyes glinting with malice. Foster, I had no idea. Tell me, did you bring your mother to the party, or is this actually your wife? The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face, shock and anger vying for dominance. Emily's hand tightened on his arm, whether in support or to steady herself, he wasn't sure. Before either of them could respond, Victoria let out a laugh that was just a touch too loud, drawing the attention of nearby partygoers. Oh, don't look so serious. I'm just joking. It's a party after all. Drink up. With that, she sauntered away, leaving Daniel and Emily in stunned silence. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, Daniel turned to his wife, apologies already forming on his lips. But the look on Emily's face stopped him cold. It wasn't hurt or embarrassment he saw in her eyes. It was determination, tinged with a hint of righteous anger. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and began dialing a number. Emily, what are you? Daniel began, but she held up a hand to silence him. Hello, Mr. Harrison. This is Emily Foster. I'm afraid we need to talk. It's about one of your employees, and it's quite urgent. As Emily began to speak in low, measured tones, Daniel realized with a mixture of awe and trepidation that the evening was far from over. The storm he had feared was indeed breaking, but not in the way he had expected. And as he watched his wife calmly but firmly address the CEO of Apex Innovations, he knew that nothing would be the same after tonight. The penthouse buzzed with nervous energy as Emily Foster's conversation with CEO Richard Harrison came to an end. Daniel stood by her side, a mixture of pride and apprehension coursing through him. As Emily lowered her phone, her eyes met his, a silent communication passing between them. Mr. Harrison would like to speak with us privately, Emily said softly. He's on his way up now. Daniel nodded, his mind racing. Emily, are you sure about this? I mean, I appreciate you standing up for me, but Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. Daniel, I've watched you come home defeated day after day because of that woman. What she said tonight was the last straw. It's time someone held her accountable. Before Daniel could respond, a hush fell over the room. Richard Harrison, CEO of Apex Innovations, had arrived. He was a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His gaze swept the room before landing on Daniel and Emily. Mr. and Mrs. Foster, he said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet space. Would you join me in my office, please? As they followed Harrison to a private room adjoining the penthouse, Daniel caught sight of Victoria. She was standing near the bar, her face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. Once inside the office, Harrison closed the door and turned to face them. Mrs. Foster, I must say your call came as quite a shock. Are you certain about what you told me? Emily nodded firmly. Every word, Mr. Harrison, and I'm prepared to follow through on my statement. Unless appropriate action is taken, I will be withdrawing my investments from Apex Innovations first thing Monday morning. Daniel's eyes widened. He knew Emily had invested some of her inheritance in the company, but he had no idea it was significant enough to warrant this level of attention from the CEO. Harrison's expression was grave. I see. And you, Mr. Foster, what do you have to say about all this? Daniel took a deep breath. Sir, I've always tried to handle issues with Ms. Shaw internally, but tonight's incident crossed a line. It's not just about me anymore. She insulted my wife in front of our colleagues and clients. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing in thought. After a moment, he pressed a button on his desk phone. Sandra, please ask Victoria Shaw to join us immediately. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited. When Victoria entered, her usual confident demeanor was noticeably shaken. Victoria, Harrison began, his tone icy, I've just had a very disturbing conversation with Mrs. Foster about your behavior tonight. Would you care to explain yourself? Victoria's eyes darted between Harrison and the Fosters. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. It was just a harmless joke. Surely they're not taking it seriously? Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. A joke? You publicly humiliated me and my husband. You've been creating a hostile work environment for Daniel for months. This isn't an isolated incident, Ms. Shaw. It's a pattern of unprofessional and frankly cruel behavior. Victoria's face paled. She turned to Harrison, desperation creeping into her voice. Mr. Harrison, you can't possibly be taking this seriously. I'm one of your top performers. The Goldstein account alone. Enough! Harrison cut her off. His voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable weight. Victoria, your performance has been exemplary, but your behavior is unacceptable. We cannot afford to lose valuable team members or investors because of your actions. He paused, his expression hardening. You're fired, effective immediately. Please leave the premises now. The color drained from Victoria's face. But, sir, please, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, Harrison replied firmly. Your actions speak for themselves. Now, I suggest you leave before security is called. As the reality of the situation sank in, Victoria's shock gave way to desperation. She turned to Emily, her voice trembling. Mrs. Foster, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it was just a stupid comment. Please don't do this. Emily's expression remained resolute. I'm not the one doing this, Ms. Shaw. Your own actions have led to this moment. With a final pleading look at Harrison and then Daniel, Victoria turned and fled the office. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor faded as she made her way out of the penthouse. Harrison turned back to the Fosters, his expression softening slightly. I apologize for this unfortunate incident. Rest assured, we take these matters very seriously at Apex, Mr. Foster. I hope you'll continue to be a valuable member of our team. And Mrs. Foster, I trust this resolves your concerns about your investment? Emily nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. It does, Mr. Harrison. Thank you for taking swift action. As they left the office and rejoined the party, Daniel felt as though he were in a daze. The events of the past hour seemed surreal. Colleagues cast curious glances their way, whispers already spreading about Victoria's sudden departure. Are you okay? Emily asked softly, squeezing his hand. Daniel looked at his wife, a mix of emotions swirling within him. I'm not sure. It all happened so fast. I can't believe she's actually gone. Emily's eyes filled with understanding. I know it's a lot to process. Why don't we head home? I think we've had enough excitement for one night. As they made their way to the elevator, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Victoria's face as she pleaded with them. Despite everything she had put him through, he felt an unexpected twinge of sympathy. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. As they began their descent, Daniel turned to Emily. You know, I'm proud of you for standing up like that, but I can't help wondering if we did the right thing. Maybe there was another way to handle it. Emily's expression softened. I understand, Daniel. It's okay to feel conflicted. But remember, we didn't make this decision for her. Victoria's actions had consequences, and it was time she faced them. As the elevator continued its journey downward, Daniel nodded slowly, still processing the night's events. Little did they know, their evening was far from over, and the consequences of their actions were about to take an unexpected turn. The cool night air hit Daniel and Emily as they exited the gleaming office tower. The city hummed around them, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the penthouse above. They walked in silence towards the parking garage, both lost in thought. As they rounded the corner, a figure huddled on a bench caught their attention. Even in the dim streetlight, there was no mistaking the slumped shoulders and disheveled blonde hair. Victoria Shaw sat alone, her face buried in her hands. Daniel felt Emily tense beside him. He squeezed her hand gently, a silent question passing between them. After a moment's hesitation, Emily nodded, and they approached the bench. Victoria? Daniel's voice was soft, tentative. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes red-rimmed and mascara streaked down her cheeks. For a moment, shock and embarrassment flashed across her face, quickly replaced by a mixture of anger and despair. Come to gloat? She spat, her voice hoarse. Congratulations, Foster. You finally got what you wanted. Are you happy now? Daniel flinched at the venom in her words, but Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. This isn't about being happy, Ms. Shaw. It's about accountability. Victoria laughed bitterly. Accountability? Do you have any idea what you've done? My career is ruined. I'll never work in this industry again, all because of one stupid comment. It wasn't just one comment, Daniel said, finding his voice. It was months of, I know, Victoria interrupted, her voice cracking. I know I've been difficult, but I never thought it would come to this. I didn't know how else to be. The raw vulnerability in her voice caught them both off guard. For the first time, Daniel saw past the harsh exterior to the insecurity that had driven Victoria's behavior. Emily sat down on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between herself and Victoria. Why don't you tell us about it? She asked gently. Victoria looked at her suspiciously, then at Daniel. Seeing no judgment in their eyes, she sighed heavily. I've always been told I had to be twice as tough, twice as smart to make it in this world. That kindness was weakness. I thought that's what it took to succeed. As Victoria spoke, the facade crumbled. She told them about growing up with impossibly high expectations, about the constant fear of failure that drove her to push herself and others relentlessly. She spoke of the loneliness at the top, the exhaustion of maintaining her hard exterior. I never meant to hurt anyone, she finished quietly. I just didn't know any other way to be. A heavy silence fell over them. Daniel and Emily exchanged a look, years of shared understanding passing between them in an instant. Finally, Emily spoke. Victoria, what you did was wrong. The way you treated Daniel and others was unacceptable. Victoria nodded, her eyes downcast. But, Emily continued, I believe in second chances, and I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. Victoria looked up, a glimmer of hope in her tear-stained eyes. What are you saying? Daniel stepped forward. We're saying that maybe there's a way forward from this. It won't be easy, and it will require real change on your part. But if you're willing to try, Emily nodded. I could speak to Mr. Harrison. Perhaps we could arrange for you to undergo management training, sensitivity courses. You'd be on probation, of course, and there would need to be regular check-ins to ensure progress. Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief. You'd do that? After everything I've done? Why? Because, Daniel said softly, everyone deserves a chance to become better. And because I've seen how brilliant you can be when you're not tearing others down. Imagine what you could accomplish if you put that energy into building people up instead. Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes again, but this time they were accompanied by a small, genuine smile. I, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I promise, if I get this chance, I won't waste it. Emily stood, pulling out her phone. Let me make a call. Wait here. As Emily stepped away to contact Mr. Harrison, Daniel sat down next to Victoria. It won't be easy, he warned. There will be a lot of bridges to rebuild. Victoria nodded solemnly. I know, and I'm ready to do the work. I'm sorry, Daniel, for everything. Daniel smiled slightly. Apology accepted. Now, let's focus on moving forward. A few minutes later, Emily returned, a cautious smile on her face. Mr. Harrison is willing to meet on Monday to discuss a probationary reinstatement contingent on you agreeing to certain conditions. Victoria stood smoothing her rumpled suit with trembling hands. Thank you, both of you. I won't let you down. As they parted ways, the weight of the evening's events settled over them. Daniel and Emily walked hand in hand to their car, both processing the unexpected turn of events. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked as they reached the vehicle. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. No, but I'm sure it's the right thing to do. Sometimes compassion can be the most powerful agent of change. As they drove home through the quiet city streets, Daniel reflected on the night's journey. From frustration to anger, from justice to forgiveness, they had traversed an emotional landscape he never expected. And as the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, he felt a sense of hope for what the future might hold, not just for Victoria, but for all of them. The road ahead would be challenging, but tonight had shown that with understanding, empathy, and a willingness to change, even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. As they pulled into their driveway, Daniel knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and redemption.